Hello, everyone. Welcome to StudyTravel TV Live, a show of news, statistics, and opinion, now on a new broadcast day of Wednesday. I'm Matthew Knott, news editor of StudyTravel magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Josh Walton, staff journalist at StudyTravel magazine. Before we get started, for the best viewing experience, please put the call in side-by-side speaker view. You'll see an icon in the top right corner where you can select the view.
In today's broadcast, we'll start with a news story, and then we will be joined by our special guest this week, Andrew Mangion, CEO of EC English, and Ramón Villa Menendez, CEO of Language Kingdom.
We'll then introduce a few more stories as we go through the show, and we'll also have a pre-recorded interview with Darren Conway, Chair of English New Zealand. If you have any questions for the presenters or guest speakers or comments on the story, please post them in the chat box and we'll read them out at the end. A big thank you to our sponsor, Londonist.
Okay, so let's have a look at our main story this week. And it relates to Malta, the Federation of Education and Language Consultant Associations, or FELCA, which represents 15 national agency associations worldwide and a collective membership of more than 700 agencies, has written to the Prime Minister of Malta seeking compensation for losses from the sudden closure of ELT schools in July.
Malta announced at short notice that schools would close on July 14th and the unvaccinated arrivals would have to quarantine following a spike in COVID-19 cases. Schools have subsequently been allowed to reopen to teach vaccinated students.
Paolo Barilari, president of FELCA, claimed that the episode had caused immense damage to the agency sector and that member agencies lost 10 million euros as a result of the closure decision. He argued that there could have been more sensible measures than the complete closure of all schools.
The association is also asking for assurances on future bookings and the honouring of the promotional voucher scheme launched in June for students who have not yet arrived in the country.
So at this point, we'd like to introduce our guests today, Andrew and Ramón. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joshua.
Hi.
Thank you. Andrew, EC is a Malta headquartered company. This has been a little bit of a mess for the industry, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's probably a bit of an understatement. It's definitely been a very tough time for all of us, in the industry here in Malta. Look, what I would say is this. While it's been a tough time for us as well, I must say I do not envy governments either during this COVID pandemic. It's been extremely tough, and I think governments are having to make decisions between lives and livelihoods, which is never an easy time. Having said that, Matthew and Josh, has this caused damage to clients, to agents, and to schools? Definitely. We are all victims in what has gone on this summer here in Malta. Has it affected our levels of trust in the destination for now? I would say yes, it has. Has it caused a bit of a mess, as you say? Yes. And as you know, Feltham and myself have been, at the heart of trying to fix this crisis that evolved in the early part of the summer. Could things have been done differently and better? Yes, we think they could have. At the very minimum, we would have wished that government would have consulted with the industry before taking a sort of a unilateral decision to shut down. Could this have happened anywhere else in the Western world? I think if we really think about it, the answer to that is also yes, because ultimately, I think what motivated this decision was a fear of a new massive wave hitting the island, a wave of COVID wave. And I think the impact of this new outbreak that there was a knee-jerk action by government, but I think it could have been done better in hindsight. My biggest issue, however, Matthew, is that the reaction that government had in Malta was not consistent with what was going on in the rest of the tourism sector. And that, for me, was discriminatory. And I've written about that on LinkedIn. I haven't sort of minced my words. I've been quite clear about what I felt. Now, will government admit to any fault? I think that's a different story. And I think time will tell. So, I leave it up to all of you to guess, what the outcome would be there.
And Andrew, just to follow up on that, really, you say about, time will tell and will the government act? Do you think there will be any kind of compensation for agencies?
Look, I mean, I think using a word like compensation is not going to lead to a positive outcome, because that compensation denotes fault. It denotes tort. And I don't think that any government in today's day and age is going to readily and easily sort of admit to that. I mean, any government will say that they're trying to protect the health of their nationals, and we've seen shutdowns across the world. So I think if we go down the sort of the compensation route, I don't think that that's going to have a positive outcome. Having said that, I can't say how government will react. Now, I think if we look to government to support the industry, then I think there could be a better outcome, because I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, does the Maltese government want to lose this industry? And I genuinely think that the answer to that will be no, that the government doesn't want to lose this industry. It recognizes there are 2,000 jobs in Malta that derive from this industry, about 6% of all bed nights on the island, and about €1 billion every 5 years come from this industry. So I think that government will want to support. Now, how that happens is a different story.
And Felka, for example, represents quite a few of Malta's main markets. So do you think that would carry any particular weight with the government?
Look, as I said, I think if we approach this from how can we work with the industry, and when I say the industry, I don't just mean language schools, because obviously language schools have been dramatically impacted. I mean, I think the 10 million that Felka is claiming is probably a part of what we've suffered ourselves as schools on the island. So I would like to think or hope that government will want to find ways to try and support the continued or the health of this industry going forwards. Now, how that happens, I don't know.
And what are the schools asking for at the moment? Are the language schools seeking any redress or assurances from the government?
Look, I mean, I think in today's day and age, to ask for assurances, I think would be naive, because the reality is we're dealing with something that none of us have ever seen in living history. And we were all very positive last year in November, December, and then look what happened in Q1 with further lockdowns in the UK and across the rest of the world. So I think assurances is not a possibility in today's world. Having said that, I think if you look at what Malta has achieved today, Malta is one of the most it is the single most vaccinated country in the world. Over 90% of the population has been vaccinated. But having said that, there's no blueprint to how this works. And I think what we need to see is, I personally believe in science, and I believe that we need vaccines to work, and we need to start trusting them. And not looking at cases anymore, but looking at hospitalizations and deaths, which we know the British government is doing, and we know the Maltese government is also looking at as well. So I would say, in terms of support, I would like to think that yes, the government will support, but if we're going to go pointing fingers and saying compensation, I think we're going to find resistance.
And Ramón, you're a member of ASAPROSE, which is one of Felka's member associations. Were you and your students affected by this? What can the government of Malta do that would make you more confident to send to Malta again?
Yeah, definitely. We were affected. We were one of the agents who were more affected by the decision. But first of all, we have to divide, and we have to talk about we've been affected not only for the students who were about to enter in the island the 14th onwards, but also who were already in the island. I mean, we had at that time 6 troops, and I do agree with Andrew in the sense of the 10 million euros that Paolo is talking about perhaps is just a small part of what we're talking about in general, no? But it's not just only the situation was so complex in the island, because we had a situation that we have as an agency, we had to refund those who couldn't start the course, and we've been affected because we had to buy flights, and of course, according to European laws, as you know, those flights had to be fully refunded to the customers, and we had to again after what happened in March 2020 and the beginning of this crisis, we had to refund in full the customers. No, so the interruption and return expenses for the ones who were in the island also is something that we have to face, and eventually the great chaos that we had with those students in quarantine. So the situation was extremely complex. I think both schools and agencies, we did our best to handle the situation the best way. But of course, you know, the island and the reputation of the island, and I have to say that getting confidence is very difficult, but losing is a matter of seconds, and we all agree. And Malta has a very strong tradition in the ESL world, and that, I think that will remain. But for agencies, and I can tell you that I'm working on my 21-22 brochure right now, and I think it's going to take us time to sell in full confidence. And trying to answer your question is, well, what does the Maltese government have to do to gain that confidence back from agencies? First of all, it's a sensible COVID protocol. We sent students to the island with the premises of thinking that there was a solid COVID protocol, but the protocol was for those students who were there in quarantine and in a lockdown for longer period than their own booking. The protocol was focused on, or was thought for students, for local students in local schools. Having a student for 14 days with no contact and without being tested, it's not a solid protocol, and we sent the students thinking that the authorities had taken that a bit more serious. In my opinion, they took, and that was the first thing they had to sort out. The quarantines for close contacts. As long as we have those quarantines with close contacts, even if those students are partly vaccinated or not, it's something that we cannot continue. We cannot continue sending students if that protocol is in place. If we have a close contact and you have to isolate for 14 days, it's something that we can understand. We cannot understand. We cannot accept especially without having PCR test and having those students isolated. You know, compensation or an incentive program. I do agree with Andrew that perhaps the word compensation is not the right one. Perhaps an incentive. I don't know if a voucher scheme or you know, other kind of incentives for international students, something needed, no? But and perhaps he's asking too much, talking about politicians, but perhaps a kind of a stability in the decisions, it might help, and not changing from morning to afternoon. I can't understand how the Maltese government after months and months promoting that Malta was a safe place and a safe, you know, there was the no COVID paradise. Changed their mind from morning to afternoon, blaming the students, and this is something all our students and perhaps some people who are listening to us have faced the same situation. We saw some scenes in the street, locals, you know, blaming international students for bringing COVID. But also, if you think what the government did was precisely pointing out the students as responsible of, you know, the outbreak, and I'm not sure that happened like that, you know.
If I may just pitch in for 1 second, look, I agree with most of what Ramón says, you know, and I think he said it very eloquently. Just a couple of things. One correction, there actually is an operating protocol for language schools in Malta. It was put together before the summer. It's a very voluminous document. It was put together between members of Feltham and the health authorities. So there actually is a protocol in place. But I agree with what Ramón is saying. Unfortunately, our industry got scapegoated this summer. We were discriminated against, and you know, we actually have seen instances where the rhetoric in the country has been allowed to proceed with people thinking that the Delta variant was brought to Malta by the language travel industry, which nobody can prove. So obviously this has affected us, and I think we need government to try.
I really want to precise. Thank you, Andrew. I really want to precise. I'm not saying that there weren't any protocols. What I'm saying is that those protocols were perhaps focused for local students, especially you know, my main business is junior, as you know, but I can tell you that those protocols were focused on local students. You can send a local student who lives in Malta for 14 days at home and nothing happens, but if we talk about and we think and if we think about our international students, you might be a bit more sensible, or it might be a bit more sensible to think about testing those students who were in a close contact with a positive, and if they have no COVID, perhaps to let them have the opportunity to go back home or things like that. And this is what we have to face. The students locked down in an island for an unlimited period of time with a very slow process of testing. So I must say that we have learned very important lessons from this summer in terms of going back to what it used to be, but also at the same time, I think the Maltese government could have improved exponentially, their protocols and their process in this crisis, and I think that we all agree on that.
It's clearly been a difficult moment in a summer when the industry in Europe was trying to get back on its feet. How has the summer been for you more generally? Have you been able to successfully send or host students in any of the destinations? Ramón, perhaps we come to you first.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's amazing. I want to stress how amazing is the resilience of the customers of travel language industry. I mean, I was talking to my team this morning, and some of our customers changed 3-4 times destination before ending up in Malta or in France or some other destinations. But trying to answer your question, our main hope was, first of all, Malta. When we talk about ESL, not secondary or university students, but Malta was the great hope for all of us. It didn't work out as well as we expected, but France worked pretty well this summer, and there were other minor destinations, and in general we had no issues. I must say that Spain had hosted lots of international students. We did our own camps here, and the protocol was pretty good. But again, we had the same situation in Malta with lots of positives in those not vaccinated students under 18. So it was a matter of time that something like what happened in Malta might happen somewhere else.
How about yourself, Andrew, in any of your destinations?
So I just want to sort of maybe end on a point that Ramón just mentioned. Look, there is no blueprint for what we're going through. Nobody alive today has ever lived through anything like this, and we need to remember that. Okay, now this country, Malta and UK following, and other countries have been ramping up their vaccination levels. We now need to see whether the vaccinations can withstand the Delta variant. If they can, then we need to start forgetting about looking at cases and just look at hospitalizations and deaths. And this is very important because we need to learn to live with this virus. And I think it's going to go from, pandemic to endemic, as the British government says. So in terms of other destinations, look, it's been slow. I mean, the UK has been very slow. When you look at the green list has really held us back. I mean, we don't get many students coming to us from the Falkland Islands, as you can imagine. But having said that, now with this new amber list that has opened up, we're hopeful that we'll start to see numbers gradually picking up again. And I would say we're starting to sort of see some uplift over there. If we move outside of Europe, I mean, South Africa has actually been doing astoundingly well in certain weeks of the last 12-13 weeks. We've actually seen numbers hitting 2019 levels. So it shows, I agree with Ramón, this is a resilient industry. As soon as borders reopen and people can travel again, they want to get out there.
Okay, thank you. So let's take another story. The government of New Zealand has outlined plans to reopen its borders in the first quarter of 2022, following a vaccination rollout for the remainder of the year.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said that New Zealand will implement low-risk, medium-risk and high-risk travel pathways. Vaccinated arrivals from low-risk countries will be able to enter without quarantine. Medium-risk arrivals will face a mixture of mandatory quarantine and self-isolation, while high-risk countries will be subject to the mandatory quarantine. So I spoke to Darren Conway, Chair of Language School Association English New Zealand, about this news. And firstly, I asked if the reopening announcement had given a bit of light at the end of the tunnel for the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody felt cheered up about it, not just about the fact that, it was probably going to be happening, but just that there was a change. Any change of the status quo was good. But also it looked it still looks like a reasonably realistic plan. You know, the government looks fairly determined to do it. So that was really good news.
Excellent. This was actually the most read news story on our website over the last couple of weeks, which indicates certainly a bit of interest from the agency market. Has there been any early impact in terms of sort of inquiries?
I wouldn't say a lot. We actually had a full English New Zealand Zoom meeting on Thursday, and I asked around, and you know, a few schools that had a couple of inquiries. We had a couple, but we couldn't really relate it directly to the news. I suppose part of it is people just not pushing it out really hard at the moment either, until we know a little bit more about what's happening.
Yeah, being a little bit cautious. Yeah, sure. But what is English New Zealand hoping for between now and when the borders open, hopefully early next year, but both in terms of the sort of infrastructure to welcome students and the sort of ongoing support for providers?
I think in terms of infrastructure, we're reasonably confident that on the visa side of things, that will be handled fairly smoothly. I mean, they've done a couple of cohorts of university students over the last year, and for PhD students and then degree level students, and visa processing doesn't seem to have been the issue there. You know, they've been handled quickly. It may be different when it scales up significantly, but so far that doesn't seem to be an issue. So, you know, normally we'd have concerns about the visa processing. I'm reasonably confident they'll figure out a way to do that at the speed that we need it. Clearer guidance on what kind of isolation facilities will be established ahead of reopening, because even when we do reopen, the barrier for the hurdle for, you know, isolation-free entry is going to be fairly high. And it'll be countries that have basically got no COVID and are fully vaccinated that will be allowed in isolation-free. So the next level will be just shorter isolation periods, and say 3 days to a week. And we're not quite sure how that'll be handled and at what cost at the moment. I mean, a week in isolation here costs, you know, €1,500. So it's going to be a bit of a disincentive if it's up in that level. So we'd like some, you know, clarity about what's going to happen there. In terms of support to get us there, we certainly need more in the language school sector. Those of us who are more or less 100% international students and haven't had any new people over the border for, you know, 15 to 18 months now, certainly need some more support. We got really generous support in New Zealand from the government up until June. But for our sector, we actually had to use any support that we had by the end of June, bizarrely. We weren't allowed to hold on to it. We weren't allowed to eke it out. If we had any left over, we had to give it back.
Oh.
So that's kind of different from, for example, the school sector, the, you know, high schools and primary schools who were funded for the year. Seems rather unfair to us. We you know, it's good on them for giving the schools that kind of that level of funding. They not only got 4 times as much as us, but they were allowed to use it over a longer period. So we would like that kind of remedied, shall we say. Another 6 months of financial support would be very useful to getting as many schools as possible to the reopening, because, you know, having a hollowed out sector to provide for the international market wouldn't be good for any of us. We all want to be there together. So we would like more support. We're basically getting none at the moment at all. And we are talking to government about it, but with the typical government sense of urgency on these things, it's moving pretty slowly.
Thank you to Darren for taking the time to do that interview with us. A full version of that to be found on the StudyTravel TV live page on the StudyTravel network.
Ramon, does having a date to work towards, even if it is quite far away, make New Zealand easier to
Australia and New
now?
Zealand are key markets for us, but we expect demand on any market able to host international students, to be honest. No, so the agencies, we have to work on a new strategy to be flexible for those quick changes on demand in the market. What we see is a bigger demand on longer terms. You know, traditionally Europe and in most especially in Spain, we find that short courses, they tend to be much more on demand than longer term courses. But now with the situation, and given that in some cases you need to quarantine, perhaps, we agencies need to start focus on those longer terms. This is what we see also in high school programs now, which are booming now in Spain. In the last few years, they have increased, but now they're booming. And New Zealand is a traditional, also a quite demanded high school program destination.
Andrew, you made the difficult decision to withdraw from New Zealand earlier this year, and we know that some of the providers there are in a kind of hibernation. Is there anything more that the government could have done to support the schools and the sector, do you think?
I'll try not to be too emotional in my response. First of all, I mean, I'll start off by, it's great to see Darren. Darren and I are old friends. We go back a long way. And I really feel for the industry in New Zealand, because we suffered the same pain that they suffered for as long as we could withstand it. I mean, let's be clear, my company has sunk millions into Australia and New Zealand at the end of 2018, and we've provided hundreds of jobs in both these countries. But what I would ask is this, and I mean, this is maybe the emotional side coming out. How would you feel if someone took away your sole source of income, which is new incoming students, and then gave you to support to stay alive, and then before opening up the borders, like way before opening up the borders, took that support away as well? It's like a doctor strangling your airways and then giving you oxygen and then taking your oxygen away. I mean, your sole source of survival. I mean, it doesn't take a genius or even a politician to know what happens next. So, look, I mean, I think the strategy that both Australia and New Zealand have used, and I'm not an epidemiologist or a virologist, but I think that building walls against the virus is just misguided, and I think we've seen, time has actually told us that the reality is showing us that this doesn't work. And the only way to get through this is, first of all, building up our evolutionary immune systems. Secondly, it's through science and vaccines, which so far, touch wood, seem to be working, and an element of behavior change. But ultimately, as I said earlier on, Matthew, we need to move from pandemic to endemic. And I think the UK has said this right, and we need to be moving beyond fear. So, I mean, obviously, we've been disappointed with the way things panned out in New Zealand, and I really wish all the best for our colleagues in New Zealand and also in Australia.
Thank you. Okay, let's take another story. And in the USA, a group of 24 Democrat senators has asked the State Department to urgently address the backlog of student visas ahead of the forthcoming academic year.
The lawmakers said that now was a critical point in the calendar where students should be planning their travel, but that in some markets where consular capacity remains low and appointments are limited, students cannot be certain that visas will be processed in time.
The senators urged the State Department to provide predictable and consistent services, maximize alternatives to in-person visa interviews by providing waivers, video interviews, and to hire more staff and authorize overtime at consulates.
Ramón, I know you send some academic students to the US. How is the visa situation, and is that a sector that has held up throughout the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Sure. The US is now our main market for high school after the problems we had to face in 2020 with the Canadian closure. So yeah, visa issue has problems with this that have been really all across the continent throughout the crisis, not only with the American government but also Canadian and some others. No, but according to the U.S. Embassy, the shortage and this blockage of visas is due to a combination of factors, including strict COVID protocols, but in the buildings where there were limited numbers of visa applicants at the same time, plus remote working from part of the team and the overdemand of certain kind of visas, what they mentioned about, because due to the Presidential Proclamation 10/143. So in our case and in Spain, things are slowly improving. Thanks to reciprocity, I must say that the vast majority of our students have managed to get the visa on time. So I really appreciate the work Oscar and reciprocity team has done in the last few months, working very closely with the embassy to get the visas on time. But there are now we're now experiencing other problems like shortage in placements. Our families or our school boards who had accepted at the beginning, some students, and now they're cancelling. They're saying they don't want international students. And I want to stress, how the organizations, school boards, J1 sponsors, they're working. They're doing an incredible job to find families, changing, hundreds of times, and the ESL industry to accommodate our F1 students. So yeah, it's been a really challenging time. It's just an adventure to send a student abroad nowadays, no? So and funny enough, with the States and certain kind of programs, there's an over demand. There's a demand that we cannot satisfy with offer. We don't have enough spots. We don't have enough. So it's quite frustrating knowing that we could have more students, more income that we need more than ever, and we're not able to satisfy. But I really see things are slowly improving, and in an objective way, we are much better than in 1 year ago. So I'm pretty positive, and with the only thing is we really hope that the presidential proclamation will end before at least the beginning of the next campaign.
Thank you. And Andrew, how are things looking for your centres in the US?
I mean, obviously, we're playing in a slightly different field to Ramón in that we're focused on English language, full immersion language schools. I mean, look, I'll be honest, the US is finally really looking up. It's looking positive. The bookings that we've got coming through our system are just moving upwards at a pretty decent pace. I think that, and I said this before even the elections, a Biden government will be good for our industry. It will be open to international student travel. Yes, there are some limiting factors right now with visas, but I do know that English USA has teamed up with NAFSA and ASSET and have written to the administration to sort of urge them to facilitate the process. I'm confident that we'll get through this because I do believe that the Biden government does want to open up much more to international students than the previous administration. So generally speaking, we're positive for next year for the US.
Great. Okay, let's take another story. And the International Language Academy of Canada, or Ilac, has introduced a vaccine passport policy for staff and students from September 7th. The school will require weekly negative tests in order for students to attend classes and activities, but vaccinated students will be exempt from the testing.
In an open letter to students, Jonathan Colbert, CEO of Ilac, said that they had a social responsibility to educate the community about vaccines and that students and staff had the right to a safe place to study and work. He added that Ilac was assisting students to get free vaccines in Canada.
And VGC International College, another English language and vocational provider in Canada, also announced just now that a fully vaccinated policy for in-person learning will be implemented from September. So Andrew, this is an interesting move. We've heard a bit more about this from the higher education sector across North America, but not so much from language schools. Do you think more schools will follow suit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, I come from a place where we're firm believers in vaccination. I mean, the day that Canada gets to 92% vaccinated, I think they should give us a call because we're already there. So we're firm believers in vaccination and in science. EC's already implemented a similar policy across all of our North American schools. We just sort of haven't really talked about it that much. Obviously we're very enthusiastic about 7th September and the reopening of Canadian borders. And incidentally, vaccine policies are already a requirement in our Canadian homestays since earlier on in the summer. So yes, I think this is definitely a move that more schools should be doing.
And Ramón, how do your clients feel about this? Are young people in Spain, or at least those that are planning to study abroad, already vaccinated or happy to get vaccinated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must say that we're not experiencing a big reluctance to vaccines from our students. In generally, they understand that this is the only way to get out of this situation, of this hole we're in. So, but I say it's just a step. From 1st of September, we're not accepting any student who's not vaccinated in our programs. It's just simple. We can't face, and this is one of the experiences we faced this summer in Malta. One of the lessons we have learned in the last few months, we cannot have students abroad without being vaccinated. So I mean, I completely agree, and I'm in line with what Andrew said, or what Ilac is proposing, and we basically follow the line, and everybody's doing the same. In France, in Italy, just to go to a restaurant, you have to prove that you're double vaccinated. In Spain, not that much, but I must say that the numbers, I look for the numbers for the presenter for the talk today, and Spain is over 75% with one dose, and nearly 70% with 2 doses. So, I mean, it's just we have to be vaccinated to travel, and we sooner or later we will all implement this measure. And I think, and I urge everybody, all the industry, to start taking this, because there are the big questions. We're looking ahead. We need to start a new campaign in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And the first questions, and especially agencies like us who trust 100% in homestay accommodation, the first question families might have and students might have is, are my host family vaccinated or not? And if not, perhaps they might not like to go. So there are big questions that we start to answer very, very soon, and perhaps we have to create a frame to accept the students and to do what we're here for. So this is something we really want to, and in terms of they're not changing they perhaps the effect of speed up the desire of traveling might help to get more people vaccinated and avoid new variants from the virus. So there's no other way. I see no other chance that getting vaccines as soon as possible.
Andrew, you have schools in several destinations. Are you dealing with different rules for whether governments want vaccinations before arrival, and different settings for the type and the timing of the COVID tests that they require?
Yeah, I mean, look, to a large extent, we're obviously trying to promote vaccination. Our school in Malta was actually, for example, able to get all of our staff and teachers vaccinated as early as fully vaccinated, double dose, as early as May of this year, because we managed to latch on to government programs that were vaccinating frontliners, and teachers were considered to be frontliners. So we jumped on board that program and got all of our teams vaccinated. I think when we look at North America, particularly the US has adopted a more decentralized approach when it comes to vaccination. We can see cities and states are starting to take matters into their own hands. There's an increased push requiring vaccination in the US. And we're now starting to see, large corporates mandating vaccination amongst their staff. I mean, I would just echo what Ramón said. We are pro-vaccination, we're pro-science, and so far I think the evidence is pointing to vaccinations, being a better guard against serious illness.
A huge challenge we have to face, and especially those who work with juniors, is what the strategy of every country in terms of vaccinating under 18 is going to be in the next few months. So in our case in Spain, we probably, most of the students are starting from the second week of September, the school, they will be double dosed. So I mean, it's just for us, as Spain's main market, it's a relief. because we can't, we will again, we at least we're going to guarantee that we're not going to face a situation of being isolated, being quarantined for a close contact if they're double vaccinated. This is something we start to think, nobody wants to be 2 weeks in a hotel or in a host family, and there are more, as we talk, there are more issues that I would love to rise and discuss with Andrew or some other schools, but we might have other chances in the future to discuss, things like what's going to happen in terms of accommodation. Can we guarantee, or are we going to guarantee that the student, in case of isolating or in places in a situation where they are positive, are they going to remain in the same accommodation? There are lots of questions that we need to answer very soon again.
But Ramon, I think one thing that's very important, and I agree with everything you've said, and there are a lot of questions that we need to be asking ourselves, but I think it's also important now that we start looking also to insurances and working. Now we know that COVID is around and it's not going to go away. I think it's very important that our industry, both agents and schools, work together with insurance companies so that there is cover for these sort of things.
Yeah, sure, definitely. The impact on insurers, especially at the beginning of the crisis, they basically try to wash their hands and say, hey, COVID is not included. Now we have to work together. But it's also, how much psychologically is going to affect it's going to affect the student, and especially we're talking about juniors or young adults, to be, or the risk of being 2 weeks in a hotel on their own, and the stress that we both know that we suffer this experience together, I must say, in Malta this summer. No? So again, we have to find the best frame to send students abroad with guarantees and avoid the situations that we have lived recently.
Ramon, but the hope I have for the future, and this is where I really believe that the lessons that will be learned from what happened in Malta will serve us very well in ensuring that next year does work out well.
Absolutely.
But the difference is that when we go into summer next year, we need to believe that almost 100% of our young students will be fully vaccinated, and that will make a difference.
Exactly. That will make a huge difference. That will make a huge difference. If we talk about juniors and adults, I think that the market, as soon as quarantines and PCR tests and all these kind of restrictions will leave, I think there's a huge demand for our courses, for our industry. There's a condensed demand for 2 years. So we're ready to get what we have lost in these last 2 years. But we have to be ready for guaranteeing the safety and the emotional, mental, and the welfare of our students. And this is what I'm now, when I send 1,000 questions to some schools that might be listening to us, they know that we really care about those questions, and we need to have proper answers before we start sending again students in the way we used to. Perhaps we might not be able, and perhaps our industry might change and go back to what it used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago, where small numbers and they were not as massive as in the last 2 decades.
Thank you very much both for your insights there. That brings us up to date with all the news and goings on in the industry.